Nintendo has done it again. Rather than just copying 1984's Excitebike onto a disc and calling it a day, they decided instead to port Versus Excitebike back to a console. The way the process worked was that Nintendo would release a game like Excitebike, and then if it was popular, they released an enhanced version to arcades as Versus whatever that game was. These arcade games ran on very similar hardware to the Famicom, but upgraded enough to improve the graphics, sound, and add in some extra features, like 2-player modes where players each had their own screen. And that's where this version of Versus Excitebike comes from. A slightly downgraded version of a very enhanced port. The basic gameplay remains the same from the original Excitebike. A accelerates, B puts on the turbo, but running the turbo makes the engine run hotter, and if your bike overheats, you have to pull off to the side of the road and wait for it to cool down. On every track, you first do a time trial of a single lap, and then you do a 2-lap race where you're competing against other drivers. You can tilt your bike forward and backward by hitting left and right, or switch the lane by hitting up and down. You need to do wheelies to get over small hills, and navigating the jumps and ramps of the course efficiently will require that you tilt the bike to match the terrain. Usually you want to match the angle of the ramp you're hitting, and nose down so that you land perfectly smooth. Of course, there are a few exceptions to that. The other notable track feature are the arrows which you drive over, and then your engine's heat is reduced to the minimum. All of this is going to be very familiar to anybody who's played Excitebike before. The hook here is, what does Versus Excitebike get you? Well, the first thing is right there in the title. A proper 2-player versus mode. Race any track against each other, and you can configure it to be a straight-up time trial, or one where you can actively interfere with each other. If a racer collides with your back wheel, they crash and you don't. Which means if you can get ahead of someone and cut them off, then you can slow them down a lot. This actually becomes a problem in the single-player mode, where the drivers are now much more aggressive. In the original Excitebike, you could pretty easily bully them around. Here, it feels like they're actively trying to wreck you. Versus Excitebike comes with 7 tracks, 2 more than the 5 included in the original game, plus there's the return of an edit mode. And the editor is a lot more robust in this one. You can make a lot meaner and more complicated tracks now. Plus, you can save them to your floppy. No need to break out a cassette recorder like you had to do to save your tracks with the original cartridge. There are other new features in the game as well. An obvious one is the whole new soundtrack. The original game didn't have much in the way of music, and while I can't say the new tunes are entirely successful, it is an improvement. You can also choose if you want to start on track 1, 2, or 3, but you probably want to start on track 1. The reason for that is that your placement now gets you points. And if you earn 50,000 points, then you get a continue. If you fail to complete a track in the required time, which is represented by failing to place 5th or better, then it's an immediate game over. Unless you've earned one of those extra chances. Starting at track 1 might be easy, but it's getting you a lot more points. After track 3 and 6, there's a bonus mode where you have to try to jump over trucks. You have to be pretty careful about how you launch off those ramps in order to clear all of them. If you manage to get to the 7th track and clear it, which honestly is a bit of an accomplishment given just how aggressive the other drivers are, then the game loops forever at track 7. So to run down the differences, you get 2 more tracks, and the tracks that existed before are refined a little bit, more challenging racing, an improved soundtrack, a good 2-player mode, and a better editor. While all those are really good improvements, I also can't say I would sell anyone on Excitebike if they didn't already like the game. This is more Excitebike 1.5 rather than 2.0. Versus Excitebike is one of the few Famicom Disk System games of this point that actually got a bit of attention in Japan, though not so much at the time of release. It did sell a few 100,000 copies, which was better than a lot of Disk System games at that point, but pretty minuscule compared to how the popular cartridge games were doing. Still, it's remembered for being the better Excitebike. And absolutely, if you like Excitebike at all, you should play vs. Excitebike. In fact, I'd say if you've never played Excitebike at all, then you should jump straight to vs. Excitebike. You'll be even more impressed by it. Your bike's pitch being the most important thing for your speed was a great way to get motocross into the game. And the risk-reward of riding your turbo hard gives it just that little bit extra spice. Excitebike was a good game, and vs. Excitebike is better.